There's a plot underway to reestablish Jim Crow. That is, to keep blacks out of white society. White society includes your favorite restaurants, your favorite hotels, and much more. But what can we do to stop them from re-implementing Jim Crow? Stay with me, and I'll tell you. Hello, I'm attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. Each week, we bring you at least one legal analysis of some trending story having to do with politics, policy, personality, or pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system and to nullify systemic racism. If that interests you, and I hope it does, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell so you'll get notified every time we upload one of these informative videos. Now, once again, as I said in the opener, they are trying to reestablish Jim Crow. We must fight that. And I am not, again, trying to be an alarmist, a conspiracy theorist. I don't do that. I am a licensed attorney, and I'm in this space every day. And I feel it's my obligation and my duty to let you know what we're up against, what I'm actually seeing in the court system, what I'm actually reading in court cases. This is my space, just like you have your space. This is my space, and I again, feel obligated to inform my people, my folks, what they have up their sleeves. And see, they never really wanted us to be able to come to their establishments and be a part of their society in the first place. But they acquiesced. But here, 60 years later, after the civil rights movement, they are having buyer's remorse. And so they're trying to reestablish Jim Crow. They're trying to, once again, re-exclude us from white society. And it's no big deal about being a part of white society. In other words, we don't get some special feeling being around white people. At least I don't. Maybe some people do. But that's not the issue. The issue is we should be able to go wherever we want to go, live wherever we want to live, eat wherever we want to eat, so long as we can afford it. But our white counterparts, they see it completely different. They want to be able to say, no, we want to associate with whom we want to associate with. So if we want to serve only whites, we should be able to do that. That is what is percolating in white conservative, MAGA, right-wing circles. And I'm going to share with you, and you need to stay with me throughout this because you know my videos can be a little bit long because I take my time to explain things to you. And I need you to stay with me until the very end because I'm going to show you how we can combat this. I'm going to explain how they're doing it, and I'm going to show you what we can do to counter what they have planned. All right, so let's go to another screen and we will get started here. By the way, I hope you have had a good weekend. Those of you who pulled for Kansas City, congratulations. That is a pretty big feat to have 3 Super Bowls in just a few years, 2 back-to-back, and the opportunity to win 3 back-to-back. That is quite a feat. So congratulations. Okay, so they are reestablishing Jim Crow. That's literally what they're doing. Now, this man, his name is Christopher Caldwell. Christopher Caldwell, he is a leading conservative journalist and author. He wrote a book titled, and I hate to even give you the name to the book, please don't buy this book, The Age of Entitlement, America Since the 60s. It's a full frontal assault on the civil rights movement, especially the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, you may say, what is the Civil Rights Act of 1964? I heard some things about it. I'm going to explain it to you because it's extremely important law for you and me as African American people. Now, what follows are several alarming quotes from Caldwell's book. So I'm going to read you some quotes from his book, and you will see why we must stop what they have planned. We must counter their plot. So let's read some excerpts from Christopher Caldwell's book. Quote, in the mid-1960s, at a moment of deceptively permanent-looking prosperity, the country's most energetic and ideological leaders made a bid to reform the United States along lines more just and humane. They rallied to various loosely linked moral crusades, of which the Civil Rights Movement, culminating in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, provided the model. This is a book about the crisis out of which the 1960s order arose, the means by which it was maintained, and the contradictions at its heart that by the time of the presidential election of 2016, that was Donald Trump's election, had led a working majority of Americans, white Americans, to view it not as a gift, but as an oppression. Now, I was rather surprised that Caldwell admitted this. He admitted that most white Americans consider the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 particularly as oppression. Now, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we're going to get into it. But what it essentially does is protect certain rights that we African Americans have. And again, we're going to look at it specifically. In their minds, for Black people to have full equality is oppression to them. It's oppression to them because they're used to having carte blanche power, period. And when they must share that power with Blacks especially, that to them feels like oppression. Again, I was surprised that he made that admission because we know that, but for a white conservative to admit it is quite extraordinary. Let's go back. He goes on to say regarding race, he says the reforms of the 60s, however, even the ones Americans loved best and came to draw part of their national identity from, came with costs that proved staggering high in money, freedom, rights, and social stability. These costs were spread most evenly among social classes and generations. Many Americans were left worse off by the changes. Now, notice what he's doing. He is attacking the civil rights movement. And he's saying that white Americans now, as I said earlier, are having buyer's remorse because to implement the Civil Rights Act of 1964 has proved to be staggering high in money, freedom, rights, and social stability. In other words, to give Black folks full equality or an attempt at full equality, they're saying it has cost us a lot of money. It has cost us some of our freedoms. It has cost white Americans some of our rights, and it has produced social stability. Now, what types of freedoms and rights are they talking about? Well, the right and the freedom to say, we don't want Black folks in our businesses. We don't want Black people in our communities. We don't want Black people in our schools. To them, that feels like oppression because they should be able to say, without the federal government telling them otherwise, that they just simply don't want to be around those people. That's what Christopher Caldwell is doing. And the only thing that stands between them saying to us as blacks that we don't want you in our establishments, you can't come in, we're not going to serve you, we're not going to let you in, you can't eat here, you can't sleep here. The only thing that stops them from doing that is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So they are attacking it, and they intend to get it overturned. They intend to gut it. And don't think that that is something impossible for them to do. No, no, no. You would be making a serious mistake if that's what you think. Here's why. They already gutted the Voting Rights Act, which also came out of the Civil Rights Movement. And they have literally gutted the Voting Rights Act. So if they can gut the Voting Rights Act, they can definitely gut the Civil Rights Act. So don't think that it can't be done. All right, let's go back. Mr. Caldwell says economic inequality reached levels not seen since the age of the 19th century monopolist. The scope for action conferred on society's leaders allowed elite power to multiply steadily, and we now see dangerously sweeping aside not just obstacles, but also dissent. So they're saying, hey, again, the Civil Rights Act prevents us from expressing our dissent. It keeps us from doing what we want to do with our own property. And Big Brother federal government should not have laws in place that prevent us from doing whatever we want to do with our property, including excluding blacks if that's what we want to do. This is very serious, folks. At some point in the course of the decades, what had seemed in 1964 to be merely an ambitious reform revealed itself to have been something more. The changes of the 1960s, with civil rights at their core, were not just a major new element in the Constitution. They were a rival Constitution with which the original one was frequently incomparable. And the incomparability would worsen as the civil rights regime was built out. I mean, wow. So he, writing for conservatives here, is saying to them, it feels like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, is like having a new constitution. That's how oppressive it feels to them. And I really want you to understand what he's saying and what this means. Whenever you have enjoyed absolute power for 400 years, to the point where you were able to enslave folks and treat them as your personal property, and then segregate them once that slave system was abolished. And now all of a sudden, you got to start respecting these people's rights. Yes, that makes a lot of white people feel like they're being oppressed. And what Mr. Caldwell is suggesting is that is the reason why we elected Donald Trump, because he came in office promising us that we would take back our country and make it great again. MAGA, make it great again. By the way, MAGA equals pre-civil rights. In some people's minds, MAGA means going back to the enslavement of African-American people. I mean, what else can it mean? Because if you look back at any period of American history, it was pretty bleak for black folks. Certainly wasn't great for us, being enslaved, being segregated, being lynched, etc. So what else do they mean when they say make America great again? Well, It must be pointing back to those awful periods of American history that we African Americans know were not great. And because they cannot implement those types of policies just outright anymore because of the Civil Rights Act, again, they feel oppressed. They feel like it's another constitution. I mean, this book is very eye-opening, and this is why I'm reading parts of it to you. I don't want you to go buy it. Don't go buy this book. Don't give this man any money. I bought the book, but I bought it because I needed to share with you what is in this book, what they're thinking. Okay? Mr. Caldwell says, let me get a drink of water here. Mr. Caldwell says, much of what we have called polarization or incivility in recent years is something more grave. It is the disagreement over which of the two constitutions shall prevail. So here's what he's saying. He's saying since Trump has taken office and white people have begun to really boldly, blatantly express their grievances, their unhappiness and dissatisfaction with things, it is because they feel, again, that there is a new constitution in this country, one that sort of overrules, for example, the First Amendment, the freedom to associate with whom you want to associate with because of the Civil Rights Act. So they're literally saying the Civil Rights Act is oppressing our constitutional rights to say no. We don't want black folks in our establishment. We should be able to do that because the First Amendment says that we can associate with whom we want to associate with. And if we don't want blacks in our businesses, if we don't want blacks at our restaurants, if we don't want blacks in our pools, what have you, hotels, we should be able to do that. So, it is the disagreement over which of the two constitutions shall prevail. The de jure Constitution of 1788, which is the Constitution that we actually have, with all the traditional forms of jurisprudential legitimacy and centuries of American culture behind it, or the de facto Constitution of 1964, the de facto meaning one that's not really legally in place, but it's sort of recognized as the Constitution. And of course, when it says de facto Constitution of 1964, it is literally talking about the Civil Rights Act. So again, in their mind, that's a whole new constitution that's oppressing them, which lacks this traditional kind of legitimacy, but commands the near unanimous endorsement of judicial elites and civic educators and the passionate allegiance of those who received it as a liberation. I mean, this is a full frontal assault on the civil rights movement generally and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in particular. They despise it, they hate it, and they're going to do everything they can to overturn it. And what that means for us is we could walk up to, say, Chili's or Cheesecake Factory or your favorite hotel, and there's now a sign that says, no blacks allowed. And you may be sitting there thinking, oh, come on, man, nobody's going to do that. What are you talking about? No one is going to do that. That's not going to happen. You're just making this stuff up. You ought to be shaming yourself. I'm not making anything up. I'm telling you what, you're reading it. I'm showing it. I'm giving you receipts. And as I said, the proof is in the pudding. They've already gutted the Voting Rights Act. They have gutted Section 4, Section 5, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which now permits states to implement all of these voter restriction laws and all of this racial gerrymandering that we're seeing. So don't tell me I'm making anything up. These people hate the civil rights movement from the beginning. They hated the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They hated the Voting Rights Act. They hated all that came out of the civil rights movement. And they, with the inspiration of Donald Trump, are now gutting everything they can. That's the war that we're in. And I'm not making this up. The increasing necessity that citizens choose between these two orders and the poisonous conflict into which it ultimately drove the country is what this book describes. So he's saying on one hand, you got the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which requires that they treat blacks with some dignity, versus the way they interpret the Constitution is butting heads. And it all came to a boil. It all not only rose to the surface, but spilled out into the streets, resulting in basically a storming of the Capitol building. And groups like the Nazis and the KKK and all of those groups marching in the streets. So they're saying basically, as Donald Trump said to them, we're taking our country back. We don't care what the Civil Rights Act is. We don't care what the Voting Rights Act is. This is our country. This is a white man's country, and we're taking it back. That's what Trump represents. That's why they love him. I don't care if he had 1,000 criminal charges. Literally. It doesn't matter, because in their eyes, he is the man who's helping them make America great again. Get back to where white people have absolute power. And in order to do that, again, what must they do? Gut everything that came out of the civil rights movement, including, by the way, including the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. He talks about that in this book. So they're beginning to attack Dr. King because Dr. King inspired the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act. Dr. King and the movement that he led resulted in all of that. So in their minds, they now got to go after the figurehead, who's Dr. King, and the fruits of his work. What are they? You're going to hear it over and over. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, which is the only reason why you and I are able to go to restaurants that are white-owned, hotels, and other public accommodation. Not making this up. This is what we're dealing with. Today, slavery is at the center of Americans' official history, which race the central concept in the country's official self-understanding. Never before the 1960s was this the case. Wow. So he's saying before the 60s, before all of this protesting and all of this civil rights talk, before then, slavery wasn't a big deal. Race wasn't a big deal. This is revisionist history. Slavery has always been the issue of this country. This country, as you've heard me say in previous videos, started out with a birth defect. In the DNA of America was the enslavement of African American people. Slavery has always been the big issue of America, as well as race. So you see why Nikki Haley will not admit, without some coercion, that the Civil War was fought over slavery, because she thinks like this man. We are making the big issue out of slavery and race. In other words, shut up and dribble. Right? That was Laura Ingraham. That's what she said to, I think it was LeBron James. Shut up and dribble. Stop talking about all this stuff. Stop talking about equal rights and civil rights and just play basketball. And so that's what he's saying that we blacks ought to do. Shut up and just deal with the fact that this is a white man's country and we're taking it back. Never before the 1960s, was this the case. For almost all of American history, racial conflict was understood as a set of episodes, some shameful, some glorious, set against a larger story about building a constitutional republic. Bull. That is crazy. Racial conflict was understood as a set of episodes. No, this country has always been in racial conflict. Whenever you enslave somebody for 246 years on the basis of their race, on the basis of their color, there is racial conflict. And it's not an episode. It's not a set of episodes. It is the American life. It is, again, in the DNA. It's in the air of America. So he's suggesting that we blacks just had our episodes of rebellion and episodes of fighting back and episodes of demanding civil rights. Apart from that, America was at peace and our slaves were happy and blacks were happy being segregated and blacks were happy just being our servants and essentially making money for us. Do you not know that we basically enriched white America from the 1600s to like the 1960s? Most of our work, all of our work during slavery, but even during Jim Crow, our work and productivity went to the enrichment and building wealth for white people. And that sort of came to a stop, or it was greatly reduced in the 60s. And that's what he's saying. And there are a bunch of them. You see it. That's why they're so passionately supporting Donald Trump. Now, I can't say that without thinking about why would black people support this? But they are. I don't understand it, but they are. Anyway, I'll talk about that later. After the 1960s, the constitutional republic was sometimes discussed as if it were a mere set of tools for resolving larger conflicts about race and human rights. Well, yes. Well, you think we're just going to sit quiet and go along with our subjugation? No, thank you. So yes, we're going to continue to push the envelope. In the 1950s, highways, televisions, and corporate expansion made it hard to hide any part of the country from any other part. Systems of racial separation, known collectively as Jim Crow, lost much of their logic, and with it, their power to enforce, intimidate, and control. Not true. Not true. Jim Crow segregation was fought for, and whites, especially Southern whites, and a great number of Northern whites and whites throughout the country wanted Jim Crow to continue. What's the old saying? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Frederick Douglass said, power seeds nothing without a struggle. We struggled to dismantle Jim Crow. People died. Cheney, Swerner, Goodman, Emmett Till, Medgar Evers, Dr. King. People died to dismantle Jim Crow. That was not the result. Jim Crow didn't go away because it lost its logic in the minds of white people and its power to enforce. No, that sounds like whites had a change of heart and said, you know what? I think it's time that we start being better people toward the Negroes. No, we forced the dismantling of Jim Crow. We had to fight for it in the courts and in the streets. Again, oftentimes having to sacrifice our lives. Now, here's the boogeyman right here. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, passed by Lyndon Johnson in the immediate aftermath of John F. Kennedy's death, was meant to deliver the coup de grace to Jim Crow and to end the black marches and police crackdowns in Mississippi and Alabama that television viewers were seeing almost weekly. The act banned racial discrimination in voting booths, Title I, hotels, restaurants, and theaters, Title II, public facilities, from libraries to swimming pools to bathrooms, Title III, and public schools, Title IV. You see, he's laying out what he finds problematic with the Civil Rights Act. He's essentially saying, and I'm going to go over it more, so let me just wait. I'm going to go over that a little more. But that was not all it did. In other words, it didn't stop us from just allowing blacks in our restaurants, our hotels, and pools. It also empowered the federal government to reform and abolish certain institutions that stood in the way of racial equality and to establish new ones by expanding the Federal Civil Rights Commission, Title V, by subjecting to bureaucratic scrutiny any company or institution that received government money, Title VI, by laying out hiring practices for all companies with more than 15 employees. So he's literally lamenting the ways the Civil Rights Act affected white power. I mean, he's complaining about it. I mean, he's like, he's essentially saying that, the Civil Rights Act also forced us to, treat blacks with a certain level of dignity. Otherwise, we couldn't get federal money. It forced us to hire blacks. It forced us to practice equality in our hiring if we had more than 15 employees, and we're just tired of it. We're tired of having to treat blacks with a level of dignity and equality. I'm wanting you to understand in layman's terms what we're up against. So that's why I'm paraphrasing what he's writing here. I'm going in between the lines so you can understand it. By creating a new presidential agency, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. Some of you have dealt with EEOC workplace discrimination. I mean, what would you do without the EEOC? Well, he's sitting here complaining about it. For us, sometimes it's the only thing we have when we know we've been mistreated because of our race by our employer or potential employer. But for him, the EEOC is oppression. By doing all these things, the act emboldened and incentivized bureaucrats, lawyers, intellectuals, and political agitators to become the eyes and ears and even the foot soldiers of civil rights enforcement. So the bureaucrats, the folks in the government, the lawyers, the intellectuals, in other words, those of us who are fighting them, he says we're the eyes and ears or the foot soldiers of this civil rights enforcement. And by golly, we're tired of it. We're tired of getting sued. We're tired of being forced to treat blacks, again, equally with some level of dignity. We're tired of it. We are rebelling and revolting against this new Constitution, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We want to go back to the old Constitution where we can decide if we really want to be a part of this civil rights era. Just stay with me. Over time, more of the country's institutions were brought under the Act's scrutiny. Eventually, all of them were. The grounds for finding someone or something guilty of discrimination expanded. New civil rights acts, notably the Voting Rights Act of 1964, which they gutted, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968, when Trump was in office, Ben Carson was overhauled, and they completely turned on its head the intent of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Brought new rights for black citizens and new bureaucracies to enforce them. What's wrong with blacks getting new rights or equal rights, equity, fairness? What's so bad about that? Civil rights transformed the country, not just constitutionally, but also culturally and demographically. It changed the country culturally and demographically. What are they saying? Well, because of the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act, there are a whole lot more non-white people in America. And because there are so many more non-white people in America in positions of power, it has changed the culture of the country. It is no longer a white-dominated culture anymore. And for them, that feels like oppression. That feels like oppression to them. And what does that tell you that's in their minds? That tells you that they feel like this is their country. It's not, what's those songs? This land is your land. This land is my land from California. No, that's not the way they see this. They see this as it being a white man's country. And now it has changed demographically. It has changed culturally. And they are radicalized, angry, fired up. And as Trump has told them, take back your country. Does all this make sense? I'm trying to point this out to you to show you that we're really, African Americans, we're really in a crisis. We're really in a crisis. And many of us don't even realize it. Well, that's why I'm on YouTube. I'm on YouTube to sound the alarm. Costing trillions upon trillions of dollars and spanning half a century, it rivals, in terms of energy invested, the peopling of the West, the building of transcontinental railways and highways, the maintenance of a Pax Americana for half a century after World War II, or for that matter, any of the wars that the country has fought, foreign or civil. Diversity. So here's some of the things he said about diversity. Just stay with me. I know we're reading a lot here, but we got to. Diversity, the governing principle, as distinct from the abstract noun, was introduced by the U.S. Supreme Court almost accidentally in 1978. It was a moment of mortal peril for affirmative action, the main avenue through which civil rights law was changing the country's public and private institutions. So diversity, in other words, came about in a case we commonly call Bakke. Bakke was a man who applied for admissions in a California university. He was denied admissions, and the U.S. Supreme Court essentially said that diversity was a compelling reason to increase the admission of African American people because campuses should be diverse. And the court says, okay, that is a compelling reason to overcome our scrutiny anytime a state takes race into account. All right, I could go deeper into that. I'm just trying to say all this in layman's terms. Affirmative action was unpopular. Well, with whites, right? With white conservatives especially. As most Americans saw it, most white Americans, let's be honest, it was unfair. But until Bakke, it had at least been morally intelligible to a broad public. It sought to atone and compensate for slavery and Jim Crow. Now, I got to take major issue with that. Affirmative action was not implemented to atone for slavery and Jim Crow. You know what will atone for slavery and Jim Crow? Reparations. Not affirmative action, which only required that blacks be given a fair chance to become students at major, predominantly white universities. That's not atoning for something that happened in the past. That is saying today and going forward, you must treat these people right. That's not atoning for slavery and Jim Crow. To start doing the right thing is not atonement. Atonement is when you give something for past injuries, not because you are now demanded and required to start doing the right thing. I hope you understand that. That's offensive. And how dare he say that, quite frankly. No lesser task would have justified giving the government such powerful, arbitrary, and constitutionally dubious tools. Bakke altered that rationale. Racial preference was meant to remedy not past, but present discrimination. If there was no evidence of such discrimination, it could only be because the whites who held power were hiding it. They were practicing racism deviously, underhandedly, or at the very least, unwittingly. This was not the glorious role white Americans had envisioned for themselves when they came bearing what they saw as the gift of civil rights in 1964. What is wrong with this man? The civil rights movement did not successfully bring about these laws because of, as he says, the glorious role white Americans had envisioned for themselves, and they came bearing what they saw as the gift of civil rights. Civil rights, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act, whites did not give us that as a gift. We fought for that. We died for that. Our blood was shed for that. We had to make them do that. We had to make them. They didn't give civil rights laws to us as a gift because of their benevolence. This is a twisted, white conservative worldview. White people fought us. They released their dogs on us. They turned their water hoses on us when we demanded civil rights. They hit us upside the head with bricks. The federal government had to activate the National Guard to get blacks in some of these schools. What is he talking about? Again, this is revisionism. This is revisionist history, and we can't allow them to do that. And to look at the evidence from the Bakke opinion, the case that they were systematically denying opportunities to black people seemed weak. A white man rejected with scores in the 97th percentile, while minorities got admitted with scores in the 18th. Now, let me tell you something. That is total garbage. One of the requirements of the Bakke opinion and the subsequent affirmative action cases was that blacks who were admitted under some affirmative action program had to be qualified. They had to be top-ranking students. They could not be low-performing students and get in under affirmative action. That is written in those court cases. I've read those cases. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I'm telling you, that is a lie. That blacks were admitted into schools when they were not qualified to be there in the first place. Total garbage. That's a lie. All right. So that's all the book. But I believe that you now see what is being said in white conservative circles and what they plan to do, the plot that they're developing to get rid of that 1964 Civil Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act is gutted. Now it's about gutting the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And you're going to hear more about it. But we can save and protect the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I'm going to show you how. So let's go back to the Reconstruction Amendments. African Americans should know all three of these amendments. The 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment were added to the Constitution specifically for African American people. All right? The 13th Amendment abolished slavery except as punishment for crime. And that's important to know, that slavery is abolished for the most part in this country. A person can be enslaved and rights taken from them for punishment of crime. I've told clients in the past that by committing crime, essentially you are allowing them to re-enslave you under the 13th Amendment. But for the most part, it abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment, it gives blacks birthright citizenship. In other words, if you're born here, you are a citizen. And that was really important in light of the Dred Scott decision, which said basically that blacks, if they're descendants of Africans, if they have one drop of black blood, they cannot be a citizen of the United States of America. And therefore, whites are not obligated to respect any rights of a black person. Well, the 14th Amendment gave blacks birthright citizenship, and the GOP is trying to alter that. They're trying to alter the 14th Amendment. It also gives African Americans due process and equal protection, and it stops or prohibits states from discriminating against blacks on the basis of race. Very important stuff. And then the 15th Amendment states basically that states cannot abridge a person's right to vote. These were the amendments that the abolitionists fought in Congress. At that time, they were actually Republicans. Well, this is a very, very, very different Republican Party now. Very different. Because this Republican Party is trying to use these very amendments against blacks. But in any event, they thought it necessary to add these three amendments to the Constitution to protect the rights of those newly freed African enslaved people. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. But the problem is they didn't have any real teeth that could be enforced. There was no way to enforce these amendments. So each of these amendments gave Congress the authority to pass laws to enforce the provisions of these amendments. The 14th Amendment was what was used to enact all types of laws, civil rights laws. But the 14th Amendment only applied to states. So in order to get the Civil Rights Act passed, which was targeted toward private white establishments, Congress had to enact the Civil Rights Act of 1964 pursuant to interstate commerce. Basically saying if white-owned establishments, restaurants, hotels, etc., are using interstate commerce, the trucking industry, etc., then they should not be able to use interstate commerce to discriminate against people. So Congress says we have authority under the Interstate Commerce Clause to regulate white-owned establishments. And so that's how the Civil Rights Act of 1964 came about. The Voting Rights Act came about pursuant to or to enforce the 15th Amendment. Okay? All right, let's go back. So victories of the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits racial discrimination by certain private entities. The Voting Rights Act, it has been gutted by SCOTUS. The Fair Housing Act protect blacks against being discriminated against in the area of housing. Now, specific provisions of the Civil Rights Act, Title I, it bars Unequal application of state voter registration requirements for federal elections. That's real important, right? Title II prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin in certain places of public accommodation, for example, hotels, restaurants, and places of entertainment. I want to drive this point home because a lot of what I'm saying may sound like legal jargon, but the only reason, folks, that we can patronize our favorite restaurants, and most of them, let's be real, are owned by whites. The only reason we're able to patronize our favorite restaurants, hotels, etc., is because of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That's the only reason why whites cannot put a whites-only sign and keep black folks out of their business. That's the only reason. There is no other reason. There is no other reason that racist white people could not say, okay, now that the Civil Rights Act is gone, I am not allowing any blacks in my establishment. I'm tired of them coming in here starting trouble, upsetting the good white people and the good whatever other people. I'm tired of it. So it's just too much issues, too many problems. So we're no longer allowing blacks to enter our establishments. The only reason they can't do that right now without getting sued is because of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It's just that simple. We are really in a very vulnerable situation. And that's the reason why I created this YouTube channel, so that you can understand the law and understand the precarious situation that we're in. We're facing an existential threat of white supremacy. I just read you multiple quotes from a book that is widely read, consumed, and has become the inspiration and strategy for white conservatives to, again, gut the Civil Rights Act. Title III permits the U.S. Justice Department to sue to secure desegregation of certain public facilities owned, operated, or managed by any state or subdivision of a state. Title IV allows the U.S. Attorney General to sue schools over segregation and provide funds to school boards to desegregate. Title V expands the role and duties of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. Title VI prohibits discrimination based on race, color, and national origin by recipients of federal funds. That is real important, because schools that receive federal dollars, universities and other schools, if they want those federal dollars, they cannot discriminate against us or any other race if they want those federal dollars. This is how powerful the Civil Rights Act of '64 is, and it's the reason why they hate it. Title VII prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin by certain businesses and created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So businesses that have over 25 employees must abide by the Civil Rights Act, cannot discriminate on the basis of race, color, etc. That's the only reason why those businesses cannot say, we don't hire blacks here. You may be thinking, you're making this up. I'm not making this up. I'm warning you of the precarious situation that we're in. Another Trump administration, that's all they're waiting for. I did a video entitled Project 2025. Go watch it. because they have put in place certain resources and people that if Trump wins, they will immediately begin to implement an agenda to turn back the hands of time where civil rights are concerned. And this is not even secretive. I mean, they're saying these things out loud. It just seems like we're not listening. So I'm here to wake you up. That's what I'm here to do, to wake you up. Who's attacking the Civil Rights Act? These people are some of the ones. Yes, Larry Elder, Charlie Kirk, Jason Whitlock, Christopher Caldwell. I forgot this other guy's name. It'll come to me in a moment. Jesse Lee Peterson. What a joke. But not really a joke, because he is out there helping them implement this agenda. And of course, Clarence Thomas, who is on the highest court in the land, helping them implement this agenda. And of course, there are 6 very conservative justices on the Supreme Court who will gut the Civil Rights Act if a case comes in front of them. No doubt. So they're waiting for the right case to cross their desk. And Sam Alito, Clarence Thomas, John Roberts, Amy Barrett, who else? Who am I missing? Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, they will gut the Civil Rights Act. As a matter of fact, these people, those 6 people that I just named you, they have spent their entire careers as lawyers, 30, 40, 50 years as lawyers, gutting or trying to gut the Civil Rights Act, trying to gut the Voting Rights Act. These folks, they play the long game. It's not a sprint for them. It's a marathon. They just keep doing what they're doing until they get in the position to pounce. And now they're in that position, thanks to Donald Trump, because he's the one who put 3 of these justices on the court. So they're all in agreement about taking their country back by gutting these protections that we have in the law. All right, now, with all of that said, what can we do? What can we do to save and protect the Civil Rights Act of 1964? There are 7 things that I recommend. Number 1, unite. We must come together. We got to stop being divided over trivial, petty stuff. We got to stop being divided, black man against black woman, rich black against poor black, light-skinned black, dark-skinned black, even conservative black versus liberal black or progressive black. I mean, it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. If you're black, that's overarching. So we need to unite as black people. And, you know, this thing about Republican, Democrat, Michael Steele is a Republican. In fact, he was once the chairman of the RNC. But he knows the threat that we're facing. He knows the threat that we're facing. And there are other black Republicans like that. So we got to unite, number 1. And then we got to organize. We need to join organizations, and we even need to create new organizations so that we can bring our resources together, bring our power together against this plot that they are cooking up and implementing right under our noses. Then we got to educate. We got to educate ourselves, We got to read. We got to study. We got to research. And then we need to educate others. Share what you've learned with family, with friends, co-workers, neighbors. Educate. Share this video. Participate. Don't stay at home. We need every hand on deck. We need you to be involved in this fight to stop this conservative takeover, this white conservative takeover of our country, because it's going to be worse for Black people. You just read all this stuff that Christopher Caldwell is saying in his book. So we need you to participate. And when there is a march against something, once again, participate, protest. Let the powers to be know where you stand and what we demand. This is a democracy in the sense that our voices can be heard. We have a First Amendment right to express our voices. So get involved in protesting. Give. Give to your favorite organization that is fighting this. Give, help financially support these organizations because our enemies are well funded. They are well funded. So give, go in your pocket and give to help prevent this takeover. And last of all, and I know this is controversial, but vote for Biden. And I am not a Democrat. I'm not a Democrat. I was a Democrat and I used to be a Republican, but I'm an independent voter right now. I vote for the person that I think is best for African Americans. And that is definitely not Donald Trump. So we're going to end up with two people, Trump and Biden. Trump will help Christopher Caldwell and others implement this white conservative agenda. That's why they love him. That's why he is so popular amongst them, no matter what he does, because he's trying to help them take back their country, which means gutting civil rights, gutting voting rights, gutting anything, the 14th Amendment, anything that helps Black people. Now, you see him, laughing and grinning with Black people and Black people laughing and grinning with him. But his policies and the people around him are very dangerous for Black people. So as I see it, despite one's issues with Joe Biden, he is the best option for Black Americans. So vote for Biden. All right. Thank you for watching this video. I think this is one of the most important videos that I have done in quite some time. And I tell you, all of them are important. But this one is extremely important because, once again, we have a formidable opponent, well-funded, who is radicalized, feels like it's oppression for you and I to have any equality. And so they want to throw off the shackles of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and get back to America, the 40s America, the 30s America, the 20s America. That's what they mean when they say make America great again. That means when white folks had absolute power and there was not a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act, etc. So we're up against a formidable, well-funded, determined opponent. So my duty is to educate you on these issues, to enlighten you, to empower you, to equip you to fight back. Again, I am attorney Augustus Corbett, one half of the Defiant Lawyers. If this content is valuable in your mind and heart, please Like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell. Until the next time, you have a good week. Bye.